The Silent Wave by n.g.k. Chapter 1. The Murder. The icy water rushed past the ship, black like liquid death. Their reflexes were sluggish, their body unprepared for the assault. The murderer knew they had one attempt at pushing their victim overboard to negate a struggle. With a violent shove, the victim felt their feet slip beneath them, their balance vanishing as quickly as their hopes of overpowering their opponent. Their body hit the railing with a sickening thud, the metal cold and unyielding against their spine. Water surged below, a maelstrom waiting with open jaws. The body landed in the churning water, and their splash quickly disappeared into the darkness along the ship's side. The murderer stood alone, watching the spot where their victim had disappeared. No words were spoken, none were needed. The deed was done, and the sea would keep its secrets. On the first night of its voyage, the Emerald Empress almost silently slid through the cold, open waters, leaving that dark memory behind. 1 week earlier, Saturday night, the Winslow's house. At the dinner, Lucy and Graham Winslow, Sarah and Peter Emerson, Denny and Terry Blackwood. As the last rays of the setting sun painted the Winslow's house in hues of amber and gold, 2 gleaming vehicles crawled up the short, winding driveway. Lucy and Graham Winslow had lived in the home for a few short years, but it had never truly felt like home. The icy walls, creaky floors, and oppressive atmosphere whispered of a sadness that couldn't be explained. Their high hopes for this home and their marriage had never materialised. It was as if the house held on to past traumas, refusing to let go. Despite their efforts to make it a happy place, a lingering sense of unease followed them from room to room. Adorned in their finery but not over the top, the guests stepped from their cars towards their hosts. Graham Winslow, the epitome of sartorial elegance, stood on the marbled steps of his home, a welcome beacon to the arriving company. His dark hair, slicked to the side, a study in precision, caught the fading light as he stood ready to greet each arrival. Inside, his wife Lucy put the final touches on the perfect table to welcome 2 couples for dinner. Peter and Sarah, Denny and Terry. Lucy's biggest concern for the evening wasn't the house or the food. It was people seeing the cracks in her marriage. Graham stood outside, rocking back and forth, from his heel to his toes with his arms folded. "He fucking loves it," Denny whispered to Terry as he stepped from their car, more slowly than they needed to. "Get out of the car slowly," he told Terry. "They'll get out before us and take all the vomit-inducing Grahamness." Terry laughed politely as Denny held her in the car, grabbing her between the shoulder and elbow. Sarah and Peter Emerson had been a part of the group for as long as it had existed. To an outsider, they were a mismatched couple. Sarah was tall, had chestnut hair, and had a kind face. She had always taken care of her appearance, especially when she knew she would see Lucy. The two had been kind-hearted competitors in every area. However, Sarah always knew that she couldn't match the cost of Lucy's designer clothes, expensive hair products, and makeup. The only unknown to Graham was Terry, a fresh addition to the group, recently added as Denny's second wife. "I can't believe he's only on 2, he thought as he welcomed the first guests. Graham was always happy when Terry came along to a gathering. "Something different for us to look at," Graham often said quietly to Peter. But Peter never knew how to respond. He disagreed with Graham saying it, but didn't have the confidence to call him out on his inappropriate comments towards Terry. Everyone knew that any attention Terry gave to Graham would not go down well with Denny, and Terry knew that too. "Ah, Peter, marvellous to see you. That tie is quite the conversation starter," Graham chuckled, his words laced with genuine and practiced deference. His laughter resembled a symphony that lured others into his world, where he paid meticulous attention to every detail. Peter's tie was a mundane navy blue, unremarkable in every way, much like Peter himself, a good, honest tie on a good, honest person. Peter couldn't decipher if the comment from his friend was a subtle jab or a sincere compliment. It hung slightly crooked around his neck, a telltale sign of rushed dressing that evening. The fabric of his jacket was cheap and somewhat wrinkled, evidence of its frequent wear. As he smoothed it out nervously, Peter couldn't help but wonder why anyone would even bother commenting on such a lackluster accessory. Peter was the nice guy in the group and rarely engaged in banter with Graham and Denny. Being honest with himself, he knew he wasn't as good-looking as the other two, had never been as good at banter, and had undoubtedly not kept as trim as them. He straightened his clothes and ran a hand through his sandy brown hair, now peppered with streaks of grey that seemed to have multiplied in recent weeks. The other two definitely dyed their grey hairs, but Peter preferred to allow time to take its hold. He had never massively cared about his appearance, and in some ways was proud of the slight belly that had formed on him in recent years. He felt slightly bad about himself, only around Denny and Graham, their manicured hair and gym bodies. Peter turned to his wife, Sarah, smiling with love and adoration for the woman beside him. Her warm smile radiated beauty and filled him with joy. Peter and Sarah, the group's steadfast couple, had been inseparable since college. They were an anchor for the group, a constant presence that brought comfort and familiarity to their friends. Their love was clear in how they looked at each other, their intertwined hands and whispered conversations. It was a love that had grown and developed over years of shared experiences and adventures, solidifying them as a haven for each other. Although Peter was safe, he probably compromised in excitement, and the other friends always knew that might be a problem for Sarah, but so far it hadn't been. She had chosen safety over excitement. Amidst the pleasantries and handshakes, Denny Blackwood's towering frame always cut through the crowd, his piercing blue gaze locking onto Graham's. As he approached, the air seemed to charge with an electric current, the joyful atmosphere giving way to an unspoken rivalry that demanded attention. Denny's blue eyes and dark hair looked perfect on their own, but they never looked right together, as if they belonged to different people. Denny's looks captivated people, allowing him ample opportunity to win them over. "Evening, Graham," Denny intoned, his voice carrying the weight of authority, while his eyes glinted with competitive fire, looking dismissively at Graham's house. "I see you've pulled out all the stops tonight. Your house looks so cosy." "Evening, Denny. Good to have you." Graham held out his hand. "Only the best for my guests," Graham said to the pair, the corner of his mouth twitching upwards in a forced smile. "It's not every day we celebrate embarking on the journey of a lifetime aboard the Emerald Empress." His voice got louder as he announced the ship's name, spreading his arms wide and smiling. "Indeed, it's not," Denny said, still travelling away, his shadow mingling with Graham's on the stone beneath them. "And I must say, your connection to Edward Smythe is quite the ace up your sleeve. One might wonder how a simple food advisor managed such a feat, being so close to the owner of a cruise ship." "Simple is hardly the word I'd use to describe my culinary contributions, Denny," Graham retorted sharply. "But then again, I wouldn't expect you to understand the nuances of fine dining." Graham had been honing his skills as a restaurateur since leaving college, perfecting every dish and creating culinary masterpieces for years. Edward Smythe, the owner of the luxurious cruise ship, the Emerald Empress, knew of Graham's reputation and asked him to design some menus for their guests. Graham felt eager to impress. In his spacious kitchen with gleaming stainless steel appliances, Graham handpicked the finest ingredients and crafted exquisite dishes that would tantalise taste buds and leave a lasting impression on even the most discerning palates. He poured his heart and soul into each creation, determined to make this dining experience that no one on board would ever forget. The Emerald Empress would embark on a 7-night cruise around the Norwegian fjords, setting off from Southampton and returning there a week later, as the main attraction of the cruise was the ship itself. It would take 2 full days at sea at the start and the finish, one day longer than usual. Tonight's dinner party would be a prelude to the grand adventure that awaited them all. The ship owned by Graham's contact, Edward Smythe. All 6 dinner guests would go, and 3 couples would reconnect after so much time had passed. Ever since they first crossed paths in school, Denny had been Graham's rival. The two constantly competed and challenged each other in sports or academics. The desire to outdo each other and prove who was better fueled their rivalry. It was a constant source of tension among their group of friends, but also a driving force for their individual growth and success. Their constant competition, mainly during school sports days, floated beneath the surface, waiting for the right cue to burst forth. The races they used to run, Denny's long legs and lean build propelling him towards the finish line, Graham's determination fueled by the need to prove himself. Those days were distant, but the echoes of their rivalry still lingered. Their teachers sent them home from school many times when their rivalry turned into a physical fight. Both men secretly thought they could still take the other. Denny, with his chin held high and an air of superiority, was never a popular choice. Yet those around him always admired his unwavering confidence and self-assured demeanour. A ripple of laughter escaped from Peter and Sarah, trying to be oblivious to the undercurrents swirling between Denny and Graham. Yet despite the fun, there was no mistaking the steely edge in Graham. A clear signal that this was his domain, and he would not be beaten in his own front yard. Graham told the other 2 couples that he had negotiated a significant discount on some of the most luxurious suites on board, treating his guests to a lavish experience they would never forget. "You know he's giving us a 90% discount on our rooms," boasted Graham. "Why would he do that?" replied Denny. "What have you been doing for him in return?" He smirked and winked at Peter. With grace bordering on defiance, Graham returned to his other guests, the perfect host, resuming his role as if the exchange had been playful banter. "Let's go inside, everyone," Graham suggested. Lucy Winslow, Graham's wife, glided through the kaleidoscope of the room, her slender fingers trailing along the edge of a silver-plated tray laden with canapés. Each detail was a testament to her meticulous nature. Crystal glasses catching the golden light, the peaceful symphony of soft music and laughter, the sweet bouquet of gardenias perfuming the air. The luxury of the room was a portrait painted from Lucy's vision of perfection. Yet behind her sapphire gaze, ripples of unease stirred. Lucy was a vision of calm and sophistication. She was beautiful, and would always be conscious of comments from others that Graham was punching above his weight, and she quite liked that. Her blonde hair, usually straight on a run-of-the-mill day, had tonight been curled, a sign of a special occasion. That and red fingernails and lipstick. "Everything looks amazing, Lucy," cooed Sarah Emerson as she walked into the room, her voice threading through the din like a delicate needle pulling at a frayed seam. "With this level of organisation, it's hard to believe our little venture didn't take flight." Lucy and Sarah had established an event-organising business years ago, but despite its success, they folded after just a few months. Lucy's eyebrows shot up in surprise as she gasped at the speed with which Sarah had raised the issue. Her mind raced to keep up with her friend's quick thinking and assertiveness. It was a skill that Lucy admired, yet could never quite grasp for herself. The words were honeyed, but landed like barbs on Lucy's skin. She turned, offering a brittle smile. "Some endeavours are simply stepping stones, Sarah, and look," she gestured grandly, "we've certainly risen above." Sarah's eyes softened with an emotion that bordered on pity, a subtle acknowledgement of shared failures wrapped in the comfort of camaraderie. Yet something darker flickered there, a shadow of remembrance that neither woman could fully disguise, and some things that weren't yet resolved. Indeed, we have, Sarah agreed, lifting her glass in a silent toast. A chorus of voices cascaded around them, the banter of polite old friends weaving a tapestry of nostalgia tinged with tension. Denny's rich and resonant laugh carried across the room, and though it seemed to bring joy, it left a sour note lingering in the air that every single guest didn't like. "Remember when Denny nearly capsized that rental boat in Majorca?" chuckled Peter, slapping his knee as if the memory tickled him anew. "Only because you were too busy trying to impress Sarah to grab the oar," Denny said, his voice lilting with mischief. There was a collective snicker, a shared history that bound them all, except Terry, who laughed along and wasn't there, but was conscious that Denny's ex-wife, Alice, was. Lucy excused herself from the conversation, her role as hostess calling her back to orchestrate the evening's movements. With each step, she was the epitome of grace, her dress whispering along the glossy floor, her presence a soothing balm against the undercurrents of discord. She was calming to everyone, the kind of person you would be glad is around in any situation. "Lucy, you truly have outdone yourself," Graham whispered, materialising beside her with a charm that felt both rehearsed and genuine. "Tonight is everything I hoped for." She smiled at him, but as soon as he looked away, her face dropped to something serious again, and she rolled her eyes. However, only after she was sure he couldn't see. "Is it?" Lucy questioned, her voice barely louder than the clink of a fork against fine bone china. "Is it really, Graham?" His smile faltered, just for a heartbeat, before he recovered. "Of course, my love. Tonight is only the beginning." "You look amazing, by the way. Those pilot sessions are starting to show," said Graham. Their eyes locked, two seasoned actors on a stage, as the other guests raised their glasses, revelling in the illusion of unity. Chapter 2. Saturday night, 1 week before the cruise, the Winslow's house. The murmur of conversation swelled as the guests entered the beautifully decorated dining room. With his practiced ease, Graham circled amongst them, a conductor orchestrating the prelude to a symphony of menace. All 6 diners were now seated around a large table. The dining room was a vision of elegance and luxury, bathed in the warm glow of candlelight that danced off the sparkling crystal glasses and polished silverware. The large, dark wood table at the centre was a masterpiece in itself, lovingly crafted and gleaming under the soft light. Plush velvet chairs surrounded it, each meticulously placed to ensure the perfect view of every guest. The centrepiece was a lavish arrangement of fresh flowers, their sweet fragrance mingling with the aroma of the gourmet dishes. As everyone settled into their seats, their expressions a mix of anticipation and curiosity. The tension in the room seemed to thicken like a heavy fog. They all knew that if this evening was going to go badly, it was here. Sarah's eyes flickered across the table, her gaze lingering on each person as if searching for hidden truths beneath their polite facades. Sarah's husband, Peter, watched her scanning the room with a suspicious eye, watching for every glance she made in Denny's direction. "Well," said Graham, "who would have thought it? Myself and Lucy are still together, and our evergreen couple, Peter and Sarah." "Peter makes it easy for me," replied Sarah, throwing him a wink. Denny took that comment as a jibe against him, the only one of the original 6 to get divorced. "Wanker," he mouthed to his wife, Terry. "Tell me you've all packed for the Emerald Empress," Graham announced, his voice carrying the vibrancy of a man on the cusp of adventure. "She sets sail in 7 days, and I assure you, this cruise will be the talk of the season." "What the fuck is he talking about?" "Season? What does that mean? Pretentious bastard," Denny whispered to his wife, Terry. Terry remained stoic, her eyes avoiding contact with Denny. The tension between them was palpable. Denny could feel his heart racing as he waited for a response from Terry, wanting her to react to his words in precisely the right way. Terry had always been a fiery and outspoken woman, unafraid to make her voice heard at any social gathering. But since marrying Denny, she had learned the art of silence and when to use it. His dominating presence had tamed her once boisterous spirit, and she found it easier to stay quiet in his shadow. No longer the life of the party, Terry now blended into the background like a muted painting on a wall. It was a small sacrifice for the sake of peace in their marriage. The group were all the same age, except Terry, 10 years younger than them all, and it showed in how much of the conversation she could get involved in. A ripple of excitement coursed through the room, as if the very mention of the ship conjured the salty tang of sea air and the promise of adventure. "Sarah is mentally packing," called out Peter, always the vision of a traditional gentleman. His enthusiasm echoed by approving nods and dreamy expressions of the remote Norwegian ports that awaited them. Each couple knew they were only going because it was an opportunity to have a holiday only millionaires could afford and their only chance to experience such a trip. Even then, going on holiday in this company, even for the experience, had been a close call for everyone. They wouldn't be going on holiday together through choice, and they all appreciated Graham's gesture of getting them all back together after everything that had happened. Graham's smile never wavered, though a flicker of something indefinable sharpened his gaze for a heartbeat. "Edward and I are very similar. A mutual passion for fine dining, you see. He was rather insistent on my menu input," he explained. A few years earlier, Edward Smythe, the owner of the luxurious cruise ship, had enlisted Graham's help to craft the ship's menus. At the time, Graham was a small restaurateur who had jumped at the chance to secure such a lucrative contract. Graham's menus had been revised a few times, but were still being served on Edward's only ship, the Emerald Empress, the ship on which the group would take their trip. It was as if Edward enjoyed consulting with Graham and wanted to extend their working relationship as much as he could. "Must be quite a friendship to have such influence with a man like Smythe," Terry added, the undercurrent of doubt threading through her words. Terry always felt like an outsider in this group, but tried to join in as much as possible. Her husband, Denny, threw her a disapproving glance at the comment, as he always did. "Yes, when you work on a project like this with someone like Edward, you get to know one another well," Graham countered smoothly, his tone a masterful blend of humility and pride. Lucy just about managed to stifle a smirk, which Graham noticed. "Besides, what are friends for if not to offer a helping hand when needed?" Graham continued, still staring at his wife. "I also thought this would be a good opportunity for us all to put everything behind us," Graham declared, expecting a flurry of approval, but his words were just met with silence, an awkward silence. The conversation started to flow again around him, a river of words ebbing and swirling with the currents of curiosity and expectation. As the evening waned, the allure of the impending journey on the Emerald Empress beckoned them all. Dinner had finished, and the guests mingled around, wondering how long they had to stay before leaving. "Lucy, my dear," Graham said, turning to his wife with a glint of excitement, "just think of the stories we'll tell upon our return." "Indeed," Lucy replied, her gaze lingering on the velvet drapes that framed the moonlit garden beyond. "Stories that we'll never forget." Graham's laughter resonated through the room as his eyes caught Denny's casual lean against the old-fashioned bar in the corner. "Ah, Denny," Graham said, approaching with a glass of scotch, the golden liquid catching the light like amber fire. "I hope you've put those wandering ways behind you for this cruise." Denny's smile showed he was proud of such a challenge. "Old habits die hard, Graham, but who knows? The sea air might cleanse me of my sins." Denny spread his arms wide in a gesture aimed at Graham. A few guests exchanged knowing glances. Whispers fluttered like moths to the flame of gossip, but luckily out of earshot for Terry. Let's just hope the only spirits we encounter are in our glasses, Graham quipped, though the joy was strained. The joke didn't quite make sense. Well, perhaps we'll finally bury the hatchet, eh? Denny raised his glass, a toast to bygones that neither man believed would ever indeed be bygones. Terry watched from across the room. Her confidence was long gone. She just wanted to get from day to day. Slowly, she sipped her non-alcoholic wine, the fizzy crimson liquid, starkly contrasting with the ivory dress that formed around her perfect figure. Lucy sidled up beside her, casting a sympathetic glance. "Quite the performance they're putting on," she murmured. "Like peacocks strutting," Terry agreed softly, her voice tinged with resignation. "But it's all for show, isn't it?" "Indeed," Lucy replied. "And speaking of shows, you must be thrilled about the cruise, Terry. A chance to see the world with such colourful company." Lucy gestured to the entire room, always conscious that Terry was a newcomer to this group. "Thrilled," Terry echoed, her tone flat. "Although I feel more at home amidst the pages of a book these days than at these gatherings." "You're not alone," Lucy confided. "Honestly, if it weren't for the promise of 5-star luxury, I'd rather stay home with my cats." A ripple of laughter passed between them, a fleeting bond amid the charade. But Terry's smile was short-lived. Her gaze returned to Denny, who was now regaling the group with tales of his latest business conquest. "Thanks for being so understanding about the, said Terry. Lucy turned deadly serious. "Never speak of it again." Terry had only been married to Denny for 3 years, and her eyes showed a woman constantly regretting her decision. "Sometimes I wonder if we're all just passengers on Denny's ship, destined to crash upon his rocky shores," Terry mused aloud. "Then you best learn to swim," Lucy replied, raising her glass in a silent salute before drifting back into the other conversations of the party. Lucy always made an effort with Terry. Although they were very different people, Lucy always imagined joining such a well-established group would be challenging, but not quite as challenging as being married to Denny. Any woman willing to do that deserved all the respect they could get. Denny had met Terry after his first marriage to Alice had broken up. Alice had been a complete part of the group until the divorce. The other 4 members had felt her loss and always secretly hoped they'd have kept her instead of Denny. Terry had been Denny's personal trainer during his midlife crisis following his divorce. They inevitably fell in love, even though Terry was 10 years younger than Denny, and their age difference had indeed raised some eyebrows. "Can't wait to see what Graham has whipped up for us on this cruise," Denny exclaimed smugly. "Knowing him, it'll be decadent enough to make Bacchus blush," Peter quipped, looking around to see if anyone else understood his reference. They didn't. Lucy watched from a distance, her lips curved in the practiced smile of a hostess. The room swirled around her. She had been drinking not to enjoy herself. She'd been drinking with one purpose: to get drunk. "I'm sure whatever happens, we'll have some adventures," Terry enthused, hoping some of the group's stories would eventually involve her. The clock struck an ominous note, its chime a prelude to the unknown. Lucy felt a chill creep up her spine, uncomfortable in her own home. Although she was happy that this evening had passed with no one falling out, so far she knew there was little chance that the cruise would end without incident. Peter and Terry stood by the fireplace. He studied her face, noticing the weariness that lurked behind her guarded green eyes. "Terry, can I ask you something?" Peter ventured. His tone was gentle. "Is everything all right with you and Denny? I mean, is he treating you okay?" Terry's expression betrayed her. She averted her gaze, looking at the flickering flames in the hearth. "We're fine, Peter. You know how it is. Just the usual marital ups and downs." Peter nodded slowly, unconvinced. He hesitated a moment before pressing on. "I just want you to know I'm here for you if you ever need someone to talk to. I've known Denny a long time, longer than you have. There are things—" "Thank you, Peter, but really it's nothing I can't handle," Terry cut in, her words clipped. She forced a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Denny and I will work through it, like always." Peter sighed inwardly, recognizing Terry's dismissive tone. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss, but he knew pushing the issue would only cause Terry to retreat. "All right, just remember my offer stands. Anytime you need an ear, I'm here," Peter said, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. Terry nodded, her shoulders stiff under his touch. "I appreciate it, Peter, but if you'll excuse me, I should probably check on Denny." Peter watched her go, a knot of unease tightening in his gut. He liked Terry, but wasn't entirely sure it was for the right reasons. "Terry," he said. Terry turned and looked him in the eyes. "I know what he is." Terry turned away without saying anything. Peter couldn't quite explain it, but his intuition told him something was brewing in the Blackwood marriage beneath the veneer of normalcy. He feared that the fallout would be massive when it finally broke. Chapter 3. Saturday night, 1 week before the cruise. After the party. As the last notes of a forgotten melody danced through the crisp autumn air and into the star-studded infinity above, Graham and Lucy watched their guests depart, their warm laughter becoming whispers on the wind. The house that had earlier echoed with forced laughter and clinking glasses now loomed ominously over them, its corridors waiting to swallow them whole into their shared silence. Cold as the stone facade of their home, Graham's hand hesitated on the brass doorknob, while Lucy, her usually vibrant eyes dimmed by unspoken thoughts, stood rooted to the spot. Their smiles faded with the setting sun, replaced by an uneasy tension like an unfinished sentence. The distance between them seemed to stretch into miles as they turned to face the gaping mouth of their empty home. Meanwhile, Peter navigated the streets leading home. Inside the cocoon of the moving car, Sarah's head lolled gently against the window, her chestnut waves casting dancing shadows in the passing streetlights. How was it seeing Denny? Peter's question pierced the silence. "Peter, why bring up Denny now, after such a pleasant evening?" Her voice wavered slightly, betraying the veneer of composure she fought to maintain. "Because," Peter began, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. "We can't just pretend he doesn't exist. Not when we're all about to be trapped on a cruise ship together. I want to make it okay, Sarah." Sarah's face turned to a frown, the taste of aged wine lingering as she swallowed the truth along with it. She remembered the sharp sting of Denny's words, the way they cut deeper than any knife could, but she buried those memories beneath layers of practiced smiles. "Darling, my relationship with him was a mistake, a momentary lapse, and it was a long time ago," she whispered, her voice laced with the practiced reassurance of a woman who had learned to hide her scars. "It was 20 years ago. We weren't even married. We weren't even together." "Exactly, a lapse," Peter echoed, the creases around his eyes deepening. He glanced over at Sarah, whose hands rested neatly in her lap, the tremor in her fingers the only sign of the storm raging within. "We've moved past it, haven't we? I really can't keep going through it." "Absolutely," Sarah affirmed, a little too quickly and brightly. Her eyes flickered away, focusing on the blur of the cityscape racing by. The shadows seemed to reach for her, whispering secrets. "Look at us," Peter said, breaking into a half-smile as he reached out and placed a reassuring hand over hers. "Stronger than ever. That's why I want to go on this cruise, to prove to ourselves that it's all behind us." Sarah let the thought cross her mind that she had never met anyone as kind and loving as her husband. "Stronger," she repeated, the word hollow as it bounced around the confines of her heart. She leaned into his touch, craving the warmth, and certainty it provided. Yet, as the car curved around another bend, hurtling them toward a future fraught with uncertainty, Sarah Emerson held her breath, concealing her fear from the man beside her who knew her best, and yet not at all. The sleek sports car engine purred softly as Terry navigated the dimly lit lanes to their house, casting pools of yellow light onto the dark asphalt. The car's silence was thick, punctuated by the occasional swish of tyres over a puddle left from an earlier rain. Denny slumped in the passenger seat, his fingers drumming impatiently on his knee. "Can't believe I let you talk me into this fucking cruise," he muttered under his breath, the words sharp as shards of glass. Terry's grip tightened on the steering wheel, her knuckles whitening. She could feel the weight of his gaze like a physical force, disapproving and cold. "You seemed to enjoy the idea at first," she replied, her voice steady despite the tremor that threatened to betray her. "Enjoy? With all those fucking old idiots?" Denny scoffed, turning to look out the window. His reflection, a contorted silhouette of resentment. "I'll stick out like a sore thumb thanks to you." She swallowed hard, the metallic taste of fear tainting her tongue. "Maybe we could—" But the air snatched away her words as Denny cut her off with a mocking laugh. "Maybe nothing, Terry. You and your naive little dreams." He shook his head, disdain dripping from every syllable. "I should have known better than to marry someone so inexperienced." Yet again, Denny was distracted by a pretty girl. He taunted himself. The rest of the drive passed in a blur of silence and unspoken recriminations. Terry knew this had the possibility of being a long night. Chapter 4. Saturday night, 1 week before the cruise, getting home. The walls of the empty house were veiled in shadows. Graham and Lucy stood amidst the remnants of the evening's gathering. Lucy watched as Graham meticulously straightened a crooked picture frame, his attention to detail bordering on obsessive. "Bravo, Graham," she said, the sarcasm in her voice sharp enough to draw blood. "You managed to keep your fists to yourself tonight. Quite the gentleman." Graham turned, his eyes locking onto hers. A wry smile played at the corners of his mouth. "And you, my dear, played the part of the dutiful wife to perfection," he retorted, the underlying bite in his words unmistakable. Their eyes clashed, and they were two forces caught in a silent battle of wills. They were chess pieces on a board where every move was calculated, and every gesture was laden with double meanings. "Graham," Lucy whispered, a hint of steel in her soft voice. "I sometimes wonder what the point of it all is. We dance around each other like performers in a twisted ballet." "Because, Lucy, appearances must be maintained," he answered, moving closer to her until he could smell the fragrance of her perfume. This scent once held promises, but now only served as a reminder of their mutual deception. "Must they?" she asked, tilting her head to meet his gaze. "Always," he whispered, and vulnerability flickered in his eyes for a fleeting moment before it was quickly extinguished. They were bound together, not by love, but by the intricate web of secrets and lies they had woven around themselves. As they retired to their separate bedrooms, the spaces between them were filled with unspoken words and festering wounds that no time or pretense could heal. They lay in their respective beds, shrouded in the darkness of their thoughts, each a prisoner to the roles they played so well. The night crept on, a witness to the silent screams and hollow dreams that haunted the Winslows' house. Peter drove along the winding roads home. Inside the car, the atmosphere was warm, insulated from the chill of the night. Sarah watched the trees blur past, their skeletal branches clawing at the star-filled sky. "Peter," she began, her voice laced with gratitude that made her chest swell. "You've been, everything to me." Peter glanced over, his eyes softening. And you to me, Sarah. We've weathered storms, haven't we? His hand found hers across the console, fingers entwining like roots. More than I ever anticipated, Sarah whispered, squeezing his hand. A silent thank you for not prying into the shadows she fought so hard to veil. Whatever it is, Peter said, sensing the unspoken words dancing on her lips. We're in this together, always. Sarah leaned back against the cloth seat, letting the silence wrap around them like a comforting blanket. Let's forget about Denny, whispered Peter. Sarah smiled and closed her eyes, aware that he had again mentioned his name. As soon as Peter knew she wasn't watching, his hand turned into a fist at his side, and the tension in his jaw was visible. He wanted to explode, and he wanted to live in a world where Denny didn't exist. The mention of Denny filled him with uncharacteristic rage all these years later. Terry's car sliced through the same night. Why did you have to wear that dress tonight? Parading around, trying to outshine everyone. You're just taunting those two old birds. Denny's sneer was audible, and Terry flinched, feeling each word diminish her self-esteem. I thought you liked this dress, she murmured, her eyes fixed on the road ahead, a futile attempt to hide the trembling of her chin. Like it? It screams desperation, Terry. Just like you. He spat, his disdain a tangible force in the confined space of the car. Terry felt the sting of tears threatening to betray her, but she blinked them away fiercely. She was a porcelain doll, beautiful yet fragile, each crack meticulously hidden beneath layers of masks. Let's just get home, Terry said, her voice barely above a whisper, an echo of the strong woman she once was before Denny's cruel way had eroded her spirit. She didn't want Denny to know he'd broken her. She all too easily recognised the shape this evening was taking, and it didn't end well for her. It never did. Peter and Sarah's car glided to a stop in the driveway of a modest house, the engine's purr fading into the quiet suburban night. Sarah, slightly flushed from the wine, leaned back against the seat, her laughter spilling out like warm honey. Sarah was beautiful, probably more attractive now, in her 40s, than she'd ever been. Home sweet home, Peter announced. Thank you for tonight, Sarah said, sincerity shining in her eyes. For everything. Always. His reply was a simple vow that wrapped around her heart like a comforting blanket. They entered their home, the smallest of all their friends' homes, but a place imbued with the essence of their shared life. A collage of photographs, souvenirs, and memories painted in every corner. The familiar scent of vanilla and worn leather enveloped them, a balm to the world's chaos beyond their door. Let's not think about the cruise, just this moment, Sarah whispered, standing on tiptoes to plant a gentle kiss on Peter's cheek. Agreed. Peter's arms encircled her waist, pulling her close enough to feel the steady beat of his heart. Love you, Pete. Her words danced upon the air, light yet laden with the gravity of all they had weathered together. Love you more, Sar. He grinned, the lines of his eyes deepening in affectionate mirth. The key turned in the lock, with a forlorn click, echoing the hollowness that greeted Terry as she stepped into the dimly lit foyer of their large country house. Each movement reflected off the cold, hard floor of the hallway. Denny's shadow loomed behind her like a nightmare, a silhouette of disdain that had long since replaced the doting husband. Without a word, he brushed past her, barging her out of the way, making her stumble on her shoes, his footsteps a march toward their bedroom. Good night, then, Terry murmured, a bit too loud. What did you say? He shouted with caged anger. I just said good night, Terry replied, scared. Not so tough now. Denny stood there. I'm sorry. I just meant good night. This could have gone either way, but luckily for her, tonight's outcome was the best of all possible outcomes. She watched the retreating back of the man who had become a stranger, her heart, a knot of fear and hope twisted together. A paradox as confounding as the man himself. "Fuck off, Terry," he mumbled as he went upstairs. Denny paused at the threshold of the bedroom, the darkness within mirroring the tumultuous sea of emotions churning in his chest. What lies ahead? Terry wondered, the balance of the potential downfalls of the cruise mingling with the anticipation of escape from the suffocating trappings of their lives. Terry checked once more to see if Denny was in the bedroom and got out her phone. Text message. "I'm okay, and I'm home. He's gone to bed. Thanks for the thing." Terry pressed send on the text and quickly put her phone back in her handbag. She was exhausted by the evening's activities, and socialising with people she didn't know was exhausting, but keeping her guard with her husband was the most tiring thing she did every day. This was her favourite part of any day when Denny had gone to bed, and she knew there was a tiny chance of further incident. This was when she knew she was safe and got to be alone. She often walked her garden at night. She had spent hours making everything perfect, the sanctuary from the world. When Denny made her give up her personal training business, she poured all of her time into the garden. Terry stepped out into the cool night air, the back door clicking shut behind her. She drew in a shaky breath and fought back the tears stinging in her eyes. Another argument with Denny, more hurtful words exchanged. This was becoming the norm. She couldn't remember a day that had finished without her crying alone. She gazed out at the dark garden, the shapes of trees and shrubs barely visible in the moonlight. Years ago, being in a cold, dark place would have scared her, but not now. Anything that could happen in her garden at night couldn't be equal to how scared she felt in her own home. She now considered fearing things such as the dark a luxury. People who were scared of the dark didn't know real fear. Feeling the weight of a full glass of wine in her hand, she took a slow sip, savouring the rich Cabernet. She hadn't been able to drink at the Winslows' party since she was driving. Now she craved the numbing effects of the alcohol. Walking further along the path, she let the tears slide down her cheeks. Sobs racked her slender frame as she gave into the grief and bitterness welling inside. How had her marriage come to this? They used to be so in love, so happy. Now it felt like they were strangers living under the same roof. Terry found herself drawn to the large pond at the far end of the property. She often came here to think and reflect. The still water, reflecting the stars in the darkness, was almost hypnotic. Standing at the edge, she stared down at her moonlit reflection, distorted by the ripples from a gentle wind. This was a safe place for Terry, but she couldn't remember Denny ever having been there. She drained the glass of wine in one, no longer enjoying it, but knowing it was the quickest way to sleep for her. It was either get drunk or take sleeping tablets. But, at that moment, her eyes were taken by something she didn't recognise. She squinted into the darkness. Something in the pond, or just above the pond, had caught her eye. As her eyes continued to adjust, the object became clearer, and Terry held her breath as, with every second, it looked more and more like the form of a person. Suddenly, a shimmering form took shape, as if stepping through a fog, rising from the centre of the pond. Terry blinked, thinking it must have been a trick of the light and the effect of having just gulped down the wine. But the translucent figure became clearer, a ghostly woman hovering above the water. Only its hollow eyes, fixed directly on Terry, remained clear. This couldn't be real. Terry wanted to turn and run but couldn't, although she knew she should. There was a comforting feeling coming from the figure. She squeezed her eyes shut. "It's just my imagination," she whispered. "When I open my eyes, it will be gone." She opened her eyes, But the figure was now much closer. Its eyes were still fixed on her, looking into her. There were no secrets in its eyes. The figure started to move slowly and outstretched one of its arms, which now came into view in detail. An engagement ring and a wedding ring were on the same finger of its left hand. The hand curled into a fist, extended its index finger, and curled it over and back, beckoning Terry to follow it. Every instinct screamed at Terry to run. Terry took a step forward, being taken in by the figure. The cold and wet pond on her foot jolted her into motion. She spun around and sprinted back to the house as fast as her legs could carry her, panic rising in her throat. She didn't dare look back, terrified the figure would be right behind her. Fingers trembling, she fumbled with the lock on the back door and flung herself inside, listening for footsteps following her against the jangling of the keys as she fumbled with them. She turned the deadbolt with a click and slumped against the door, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Looking into the garden, there was no sign of anyone. It wasn't real, she told herself firmly, even as a seed of doubt took root in her mind. She poured another glass of red wine and gulped it down, it fighting its way down her throat as she still tried to catch her breath against it. She set the glass on the kitchen counter with a thump and headed for her bedroom. All she wanted now was to burrow under the covers and shut out the world and the haunting vision that she feared would revisit her in her dreams. She couldn't decide whether she'd rather be locked inside or locked outside with her haunting visions, which was a sad thought. Crawling into bed, fully clothed, she pulled the blanket tightly around her and squeezed her eyes shut, praying for a dreamless sleep. Denny and Terry hadn't shared a bedroom for months. She knew they would need to on the cruise, and it made her feel sick. But Terry had got used to living day by day, and there were 7 days until she needed to worry about how to handle it. Chapter 5. 7 days later. Saturday afternoon, Southampton Dock. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a golden glow on the bustling deck of the Emerald Empress as she prepared to embark on her luxurious journey. The cruise ship exuded an air of sophistication and luxury, with its majestic decks lined with plush lounges and chic cabanas. Her deck was adorned with potted palms swaying gently in the coastal breeze, adding a touch of tropical elegance to the already exquisite setting, which may have seemed out of place on a cruise to the Norwegian fjords, but seemed to make sense in the evening sun of Southampton. The Emerald Empress towered over the harbour, her sleek white hull glinting in the sunlight. The ship was adorned with gold accents and sparkling lights, giving off an air of luxury and extravagance. It was the size of a small cruise ship, but seemed even more exquisite in its design and presence. Beautiful chandeliers hung in the grand atrium, casting warm, inviting light on the marble floors and intricate woodwork. It was like a luxury hotel that happened to be a boat. Plush velvet couches beckoned guests to sink into their soft embrace, while crystal vases filled with fresh flowers added a touch of colour and fragrance to the air. The guests, dressed in their finest evening wear, moved gracefully about the deck, their laughter mingling with the soft strains of music that floated on the sea breeze. Sarah looked around in the car park and imagined everyone on board had taken the time to choose their boarding outfit, as she most certainly had. The scent of fresh sea air mixed with the aroma of exotic spices from the ship's gourmet restaurants who served light snacks as the guests socialised. A gentle murmur of excited chatter filled the air, blending with the distant sound of seagulls soaring overhead. The ship was a hive of activity, with crew members scurrying about in their crisp white uniforms, attending to every detail with precision. A string quartet set up in a corner, their melodious tunes drifting through the air, adding to the ambience of sophistication and luxury. The music surrounded everyone and disappeared into the breeze. It was as if the ship affected everything around it, the centre of attraction in the port. Just like the week before, Graham Winslow stood at the top of the gangway, waiting to greet his guests, a faint smile playing on his lips as he surveyed the grandeur of the Emerald Empress. Despite obviously not owning the ship, his demeanour exuded an unmistakable air of authority and ownership over the evening's events. He knew that none of the others would be there without him and intended to let them know. He spotted Lucy, who was arranging to hand the bags to one of the ship's porters. Guests of the Emerald Empress would leave their luggage in an office on the dock, where it would be checked in and taken to their rooms, even before they could get to the rooms themselves. Lucy handed her bags to an older man in a faded blue cap. He wore the same uniform as everyone else, but the cap looked out of place, and it was apparent it had been worn for years. Lucy imagined he was almost 70, but could look older than he was. The sea air had weathered his face. He smiled, the lines around his eyes crinkling. "You can leave your cases here with me. My name is Bill. Been working these docks longer than I care to remember. Your case will be safe." "Nice to meet you, Bill," Lucy said, returning his kind smile. As he hoisted her luggage, she noticed an anchor tattoo peeking from under his rolled-up sleeve. Bill's expression suddenly turned serious. "Storm's brewing, miss. I can feel it in my bones. I always could. Some of the fishing boats I used to be on, they'd turn off their kit because I was so good at it. When you've been around as long as I have, you know when something bad is coming. I wouldn't even get on this ship if I was you." Lucy laughed a polite laugh. She instinctively looked around to see if there was anyone to save her if Bill didn't stop talking. There wasn't. She couldn't shake the feeling that Bill meant more than just the weather when he said something bad was coming. Trying to lighten the mood, she said, "I bet you have lots of stories from your time on the ships." Bill's eyes took on a faraway look tinged with sadness. "Aye, too many. Not enough good ones." Without warning, in a sad, slow voice almost under his breath, with a rhythm only available to a person of the sea, Bill started to chant, "The sea keeps secrets dark and deep, in graves where silent shadows sleep. She hides her past in rolling waves, and guards the lost in hidden caves." Lucy, completely embarrassed, looked around for help, but there was still no one. "I've seen the bones, the broken wood where sailors vanished, where they stood." She takes her share without a sound and buries all beneath the ground. "Oh, that's lovely," Lucy said, hoping to bring an end to the recital. "Still, every dawn, I cast my line and watch her secrets twist and shine. For though I know she'll not reveal, I'll chase the truths she'll never feel." "That was, lovely," Lucy managed, forcing a smile. "Thank you for sharing, but I really must be going. My husband is waiting." Bill nodded, a knowing look in his eye. "Of course, miss. Don't go on this cruise." Lucy wondered why Bill felt the need to stop her from going on the ship. "Bill, we've talked about this. Stop scaring the passengers," called one of the other ship's crew, but with a flirty smile towards Lucy. "It's fine. It's really fine. Nice to meet you, Bill." Lucy hurried away. She spotted Graham across the deck and approached him, trying to push down the sense of foreboding that Bill's words had stirred within her. Something was coming. Lucy now stood by Graham's side. She exuded a quiet grace that complemented Graham's charismatic presence. Her elegant poise added a layer of refinement to their already sophisticated image as a power couple, despite them both knowing that their marriage was possibly past all points of no return. They had passed the Rubicon without a plan for the future. As Sarah and Peter approached, Graham's smile widened, though Sarah couldn't shake off the unease creeping up her spine. The way Graham's eyes lingered a moment too long on her made her skin crawl with a sensation she couldn't quite place. She exchanged pleasantries with Lucy, their smiles masking hidden tensions born from secrets buried deep within their shared past. "Next stop, Stavanger," said Graham, alluding to the first stop on their trip, after a prolonged 2-day cruise to Norway. "I can't wait to get to the fjords," replied Sarah, with a slightly disparaging tone about visiting Norway's third biggest city. "Well, that's not the main attraction, this is." Graham turned to gesture to the ship itself. The 4 guests' eyes were drawn to a lone figure on the top level of the ship, an area that looked like it would be off-limits to passengers. A tall, grey-haired man looked back at them, too far away to gesture, too close to ignore. "And there's our host, Edward." Graham turned back to the group. "I'm sure we'll get to talk to him later." Denny and Terry approached the steps to take them on board. Denny was walking in front of Terry. The pair were not speaking. "They've argued," Lucy whispered. "This is going to be fun." Denny's charismatic facade barely concealed the underlying power play that always simmered beneath his interactions. Sarah observed the exchange, noting the subtle signs of dominance that Denny effortlessly wielded over those around him. "Ah, there they are," Graham exclaimed, his tone warm and welcoming. "Welcome aboard the Emerald Empress. I trust your voyage thus far has been pleasant." "You sound like such a prick, Graham," replied Denny angrily, his piercing blue eyes reflecting confidence and authority. Seeing the shock on Graham and Lucy's faces, he continued. "This ship is amazing. Edward Smythe has outdone himself." Denny was keen to emphasise that Graham didn't actually own the ship. "He really has. I'm pleased to be friends with him," Graham said, managing a forced smile as he shook Denny's hand, each man trying to grip harder than the other. "Come, let us show you to your suites." "What an ungrateful wanker," Graham said in Sarah's direction. She didn't even return a glance. As the group of 6 made their way through the lavishly adorned corridors, they marvelled at the luxury surrounding them. Thick carpets lined the floors, and ornate lights illuminated their path from above. Even Denny gave an approving nod to Terry, who looked away, the argument in the car still circling in her mind. "Goodness, this is extraordinary," Sarah whispered, exchanging glances with Lucy, who offered her a warm smile. "Indeed," agreed Peter, his brow furrowing slightly. "I didn't expect such extravagance. What exactly did we do to deserve this? Edward must really like you, Graham." Peter wanted to counterbalance Denny's sarcastic comments. He was grateful to Graham for allowing them to go on this cruise. He knew Sarah would enjoy it, but there was no way he could afford a holiday like this. "Ah, well," Graham began, a mischievous glint in his eye. "Edward owes me a favour from our deal. I thought it was high time he repaid it." "Simply breathtaking," Terry murmured, her green eyes wide with wonder. "You deserve this, darling," said Denny, still aware that people could hear him, and he was still feeling guilty about the terrible week he'd put her through since the friends gathered for dinner and the car journey to the port. Terry had become practiced at looking like she hadn't been crying. "Edward certainly knows how to treat his guests," Lucy said, her voice gentle and measured. "Shall we reconvene on deck for champagne and canapés at 9? Graham suggested, eager to maintain his role as the gracious host. "We wouldn't want to miss the departure." The guests had previously agreed to eat before they boarded or grab a quick snack on the first night, which took the pressure off them from socialising too much on the first evening. Since they had agreed on this a week ago, Terry had worried that Denny would be drinking and not eating much. Those nights didn't end well. "Of course," Denny agreed, his tone suddenly sharp and cutting. "Lead the way, Winslow." The group started their journey to their suites through the grand lobby of the ship, which was modern and luxurious, but not in a tacky way. Clean white lines, marble fixtures, and beautiful down lighting showed the way. "We should look for the signage to the suites," Graham proudly declared, acting as the group leader, a few steps ahead of everyone. The lobby was busy, but the VIP elevator was waiting for them. All 6 stepped inside the glass cube, edged with aluminium. As the doors closed, the bustle of the lobby disappeared, leaving them in silence. "Ah, before I forget, we've already checked in for you." Graham handed Terry and Sarah their room key fobs. "Give it to the responsible ones," he said, to the inevitable eye roll from Denny. The elevator rose above the lobby and passed an identical elevator going the other way, but with no one in it, passing them halfway. "That's apparently why there is always one waiting for us at the bottom," said Graham, winking at Lucy. "VIPs shouldn't have to wait for a lift, right, everyone?" A polite chuckle was barely audible. "Right, here we all are." They all stepped out of the lift into a wide hallway, lined with tall vases containing flowers. Clear entrances led to 3 suites, each with a vast space between them, showing their length. "We're in this first one, Peter and Sarah in the next one, and Denny and Terry in the end one," declared Graham, again showing that he was making the decisions on this cruise. As the other guests left to make themselves at home, Terry and Denny found themselves in the peaceful sanctuary of their suite. The room exuded a sense of tranquility, with soft candlelight casting a warm glow on the rich mahogany furniture and delicate silk draperies that billowed gently in the sea breeze. The suite had 3 rooms, a bedroom, a lounge area, and a bathroom. "Who lights these bloody candles?" Denny laughed, removing his jacket and throwing it onto the back of a chair. Terry sniggered back, momentarily annoyed that her smiling might have shown Denny that she was now okay about the argument in the car. Terry always remembered how funny he could be, and just wished she could keep the good bits of Denny and not have the bad bits. Denny approached Terry, his usual air of authority softened by a genuine look of remorse in his piercing blue eyes. "Terry, I wanted to apologise," he began, his voice tinged with a rare vulnerability. "My insecurities have blinded me to the hurt I am causing you. But you, with your unwavering patience and understanding, never give up on me. You know all too well about my inner demons, yet you continue to stand by my side through it all. And now, I can only hope you can find it in your heart to forgive me for my mistakes and shortcomings. Without you, my world would be a dark and lonely place." At that moment, Denny stepped back to the chair and reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket to pull out a small velvet box. Terry's breath caught in her throat as he opened it to reveal a stunning diamond ring that sparkled in the candlelight, casting prisms of colour across the room. "I got this for you," Denny said softly, his voice laced with sincerity. "It's a token of my love and a promise to do better, to be better for you." Terry's eyes welled with the tears as she gazed at the beautiful ring, and a rush of emotions swirled inside her. All she wanted was for them to be okay again, for them both to be how they were initially. She looked up at Denny, seeing a side of him she hadn't witnessed in a long time, vulnerability and genuine remorse. "Denny," she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. I don't know what to say." Denny took her hand gently and slid the ring onto her finger, his touch tender and warm. Terry gazed up at him, her green eyes reflecting emotions, hurt, love, and a flicker of hope. She reached out to touch his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. "I have been a fool to let my pride and anger cloud my judgment. The thought of losing you, of losing us, it terrifies me more than anything else." Denny's voice wavered, a raw honesty breaking through his usual facade of control. Terry knew she shouldn't get caught up in the moment, but amidst it all, there was a glimmer of happiness, a potential for healing and forgiveness. Terry's thoughts swirled with curiosity as she contemplated asking Denny about his past relationships with Sarah and Lucy. She couldn't help but wonder if there had been something more between them. She didn't know for sure. but she had always been suspicious. Although he had never explicitly denied it, he had also never been honest about it, and she knew it. But in that moment, surrounded by the peacefulness of the room and Denny's content smile, she decided to keep her question to herself. Despite their closeness, she knew Denny's mood was always fragile, and she wanted to protect his current mood at all costs.